China has billionaires. Section. Automatic subject. John Pilger's 2016 documentary, The Coming War on China, documents the U.S. pivot to Asia, initiated by Obama in 2011, and carried on by subsequent administrations. It mostly centers on the victims of U.S. military base building in the Pacific, the Marshall Islands, Okinawa in Japan, and South Korea. He also interviews Chinese targets of this military buildup. His exchange with Eric Lee, a Shanghai-born, California-educated venture capitalist and political commentator, is fascinating. Lee: At the moment, the Chinese, the party state, has proven an extraordinary ability to change. I mean, I make the joke, in America you can change the political party, but you can't change the policies. In China, you cannot change the party, but you can change policies. So in the past 66 years, China has been run by one single party. Yet the political changes that have taken place in China in these past 66 years have been wider and broader and greater than probably any other major country in modern memory. Pilger: So in that time, China ceased to be communist. Is that what you're saying? Lee: Well, China is a market economy, and it's a vibrant market economy. But it's not a capitalist country. Here's why. There's no way a group of billionaires could control the Politburo, as billionaires control American policymaking. So in China you have a vibrant market economy, but capital does not rise above political authority. Capital does not have enshrined rights. In America, capital, the interests of capital and capital itself, has risen above the American nation. The political authority cannot check the power of capital. That's why America is a capitalist country and China is not. John Pilger appears to remain skeptical, as do many who dismiss Lee's insight simply on the basis of his identity, Chinese businessman. And yet I believe what he is saying here is far more insightful and pertinent than anything you might find in any of David Harvey's lectures. Why? Let's travel back to Marx's Grundrisse. Quote, It is not individuals who are set free by competition. It is rather capital which is set free. Beyond being a brilliant rebuke of liberal praise of competition in the abstract, it is notable that Marx here does not speak about worker versus capitalist, but of individual, that is human, versus capital. If this seems like a tendentious reading, consider this fragment from his 1844 manuscripts. Quote, Estrangement appears not only in that the means of my life belong to another, and that my desire is the inaccessible possession of another, but also in that all things are other than themselves, and that, and this goes for capitalists too, an inhuman power rules over all. End quote. Marx's inhuman power and, quote, capital which is set free, is the same entity that Eric Lee has in mind when he speaks of capital itself and its, quote, enshrined rights. This talk, which appealingly, to me, borders on the supernatural, stands in stark contrast with Bernie Sanders-style rhetoric that chalks the problems we are mired in up to mere, quote, corporate greed. Greed is the vice in question, of course. One to be cursed and curbed. But every serious theorist understands that we face a far more serious challenge than the mere assembly of policymakers with good moral fiber. Consider Engels in On Authority. Quote, If mankind, by dint of science and its inventive genius, has bent the forces of nature to its will. The latter avenge themselves by subjecting humanity, insofar as it employs them, to a true despotism, independent of all social organization." End quote. Consider Lenin in Imperialism. Quote, "The capitalists divide the world, not out of any particular malice, but because the degree of concentration which has been reached forces them to adopt this method in order to obtain profits." End quote. It is useful to conceive of two interlocking but different struggles, that of the worker versus the capitalist, and that of humanity versus capital itself. The worker's triumph over the capitalist, to each according to their work, is in a sense a precondition for humanity's triumph over capital, to each according to their need. According to Christian Thorne, quote, "Marx's critique of political economy began as the philosophical critique of religion." End quote. His work must be read in full, but the parallels he calls for are striking. In the Hegelian account of alienation, 1. Humans invented God. 2. Having invented God, humans then assigned to him their own powers of creation. 3. Having projected thought onto a non-human and invented entity, humans then subordinate themselves to it. In Marx's critique of capitalism, 1. People make capital. Everything that counts as capital is a human creation. 2. Having created capital, people then assign to it the powers of creation. 3. Once the creative powers of work get misassigned to capital, actual workers are made subordinate to it. This is capital as automatic subject. A technophile may call it something akin to a market-based artificial intelligence arising from game-theoretical instrumental rationality. Someone like Fidel Castro puts it more poetically, but I believe he is grappling with the same demon. Emphasis mine. Beginning of long quote. Would you say capitalism, with its blind laws, its selfishness as fundamental principle, has given us something to emulate? Man should have the possibility to chart his own course, to plan his own life, to employ human resources and natural resources rationally, instead of this mad race that has led us nowhere and will lead us nowhere. And so I cannot see why people talk about the swan song of socialism. I identify socialism with new ideas, with advancement, with progress, with the capacity of man to design his life, design his society, project himself into the future. End quote. This is my preferred formulation. Quote, "Feudal lords were the masters of feudalism. Capitalists, however, aren't the masters of capitalism. They are merely the high priests of capitalism. The master of capitalism is capital itself." End quote. Now, it would be a mistake to presume we are merely shackled via mental bonds, as so many of those who would plead for the masses to simply, quote, "wake up," often appear to believe. Marx and Engels are both emphatic in rejecting such a notion. Marx, from The German Ideology, beginning of long quote. "It is only possible to achieve real liberation in the real world by employing real means. That slavery cannot be abolished without the steam engine and the mule and spinning jenny. Serfdom cannot be abolished without improved agriculture. And that, in general, people cannot be liberated as long as they are unable to obtain food and drink, housing and clothing in adequate quality and quantity. Liberation is an historical and not a mental act, and it is brought about by historical conditions, the development of industry, commerce, agriculture, the conditions of intercourse." End quote. Quote from Engels, The Principles of Communism. "Will it be possible for private property to be abolished at one stroke? No. No more than existing forces of production can, at one stroke, be multiplied to the extent necessary for the creation of a communal society. In all probability, the proletarian revolution will transform existing society gradually, and will be able to abolish private property only when the means of production are available in sufficient quantity." End quote. The need to transcend this miserable stage of historical development is urgent. And yet history has shown that the local liquidation of the capitalist class is insufficient. Witnessing the struggles of the Soviet Union, Trotsky and his followers mocked socialism in one country, only to turn and push some truly fantastical garbage about permanent world revolution. In this context, we begin to understand the genius behind the risky, yet plainly rewarding balancing act that the CPC has been managing the last 4 decades, since Deng initiated the process of reform and opening up. Consider the trajectory traced by Losurdo. From his 2017, Has China Turned to Capitalism? Point. Mao 1958. Responding to criticism from the Soviet Union regarding the persistence of capitalist areas in the Chinese economy. Quote, "There are still capitalists in China, but the state is under the leadership of the Communist Party." End quote. Point. Deng, 1978. Quote, "We shall not allow a new bourgeoisie to take shape." End quote. Point. Deng, 1985. Quote, "Is it possible that a new bourgeoisie will emerge? A handful of bourgeois elements may appear, but they will not form a class." End quote. What does this look like as of 2018? McGregor's frightened pen once again proves insightful. Beginning of long quote. One recent survey by the Central Organization Department, the party's personnel body, found that 68% of China's private companies had party bodies by 2016, and 70% of foreign enterprises. Although these figures sound high, they don't match the targets the party has set for itself. In Xi's old stamping ground of Zhejiang, for example, officials set a target in August 2018 to have cells inside 95% of private businesses. There was a need, the survey said, to retain the revolutionary spirit inside the companies, as their ownership was handed on to the next generation. End of long quote. It simply does not matter how distasteful Westerners, or indeed Soviets, find this compromise. A good scientific theory is able to make accurate predictions and take risks on account of confidence in core principles. Deng is brimming with confidence in his interview with Oriana Fallaci in 1980. Fallaci. But isn't this just the dawn of a new capitalism in miniature? Deng, beginning of long quote. Let's say that the principles that we are following as we rebuild this country are essentially the same that were formulated at the time of Chairman Mao. To concentrate on our strengths, and to consider international assistance as a subsidiary factor and nothing more. In whatever measure we open ourselves to the world, in whatever way we use foreign capital or accept the assistance of private investments. This assistance will only constitute a small part of the Chinese economy. In other words, foreign capital, and even the fact that foreigners will build factories in China, will not influence in any way our system, which is a socialist system based upon public ownership of the means of production. Despite this, we are aware that the decadent influence of capital will inevitably develop in China. Well, I don't think that's such a terrible thing. I don't think that it's correct to be afraid of this. End of long quote. And then again in 1984, beginning of long quote by Deng. We have opened 14 large and medium-sized coastal cities. We welcome foreign investment and advanced techniques. Management is also a technique. Will they undermine our socialism? Not likely, because the socialist sector is the mainstay of our economy. Our socialist economic base is so huge that it can absorb tens of hundreds of billions of dollars worth of foreign funds without being shaken. Foreign investment will doubtless serve as a major supplement in the building of socialism in our country. And as things stand now, that supplement is indispensable. Naturally, some problems will arise in the wake of foreign investment, but its negative impact will be far less significant than the positive use we can make of it to accelerate our development. It may entail a slight risk, but not much. Well, those are our plans. We shall accumulate new experience and try new solutions as new problems arise. In general, we believe that the course we have chosen, which we call building socialism with Chinese characteristics, is the right one. We have followed this road for 5.5 years and have achieved satisfactory results. Indeed, the pace of development has so far exceeded our projections. If we go on this way, we shall be able to reach the goal of quadrupling China's GNP by the end of the century. And so I can tell our friends that we are even more confident now. End quote. And then again in 1985, beginning of long quote by Deng. We summed up our experience in building socialism over the past few decades. We had not been quite clear about what socialism is and what Marxism is. Another term for Marxism is communism. It is for the realization of communism that we have struggled for so many years. We believe in communism, and our ideal is to bring it into being. In our darkest days, we were sustained by the ideal of communism. It was for the realization of this ideal that countless people laid down their lives. A communist society is one in which there is no exploitation of man by man. There is great material abundance, and the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs is applied. It is impossible to apply that principle without overwhelming material wealth. In order to realize communism, we have to accomplish the tasks set in the socialist stage. They are legion, but the fundamental one is to develop the productive forces so as to demonstrate the superiority of socialism over capitalism, and provide the material basis for communism. End of long quote. There is no sense whatsoever, practical or principled, in refusing to credit Deng for his confidence in the Chinese people, in Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought, and in democratic centralism as a bulwark against capitalist subterfuge. People who rightfully acknowledge Lenin's innovations over Marx and Engels, and then turn to reject Deng's contributions, are simply practicing chauvinism. End of section.